Welcome to my budget deck channel where I try to make cheap and playable decks. Today I wanted to have a look at Monarchs, which I have been a massive fan of since the new structure deck, and also before when I played as a kid. I liked the Monarchs when they didn't have their own theme, but they were just tribute summonable monsters, and yeah, well, Mobius was one of the best spell trap card removals since the limitation of Mystical Space Typhoon. So I really haven't been enjoying this deck for years, and now I wanted to kind of have a look at the deck and see if you can actually find a variant to play that is a bit more budget than this kind of variant is. In real life they're very budget, but here the problem comes with the ultra rares. You have 3 ultra rares that are kind of essential for the whole playstyle, so you kind of want to avoid playing them if you don't have them, obviously. If you have them, there's a lot of channels that do very good Monarch deck profiles, so do check them out. But if you're actually interested in my specific variant that is a bit more on the budget kind of side, then hear me out. I will do a card by card, and I will talk about why I choose which card over what other card, and what other cards you could be playing to improve the deck a tiny bit if you happen to have like 1 or 2 of the ultra rares, but don't plan on opening the whole pack. First of all, for the ratios of the Tribute Fodder, which is Triple Idia. It's a great card, helps you recycle your Monarch spell traps. Also helps you summon out the other Squire, which helps you tribute summon more of your Monarchs, which is obviously what you want to be doing. So these two work quite well in conjunction. Light and darkness working together, classic yin and yang Konami situation going on here. What you could be doing is play another one of Mithra, the Thunder Vassal. Geez, that's a mouthful. Because this card works especially well in this kind of variant where you play a lot of the low level Monarchs, not the high level ones. I will get to why that is in a second as well. So this card kind of works, but I don't like giving your opponent a token, so you could run it at 1 and maybe swap it even out for one of the Pendulum monsters. Plus, don't be afraid, it's not actually having anything to do with Pendulum Summon. You just need this card. It gives you 1 extra draw and Tribute Fodder for one of your Monarchs. Especially in this deck, this card can be pretty neat. Also, one deciding thing about this card is it's level 5, so you can tribute summon it, which, hear me out, is actually key for one of the main playmakers of the deck. And I say playmakers, but actually just mean floodgates, which is the Monarch's Erupt, but later on that more. I don't count Ash Blossom as an ultra rare for this deck because most people have it. You don't have to run it. You can run basically anything else. Since this is mainly a go first variant, you can run any other power trap as well if you feel like it. This just helps you if you ever have to go second and you by chance draw it. It does help you in comparison to other cards that would not help you. Getting on with the actual Monarch lineup. 1 Mobius the Frost Monarch, double Thestalos the Firestorm Monarch. You could technically run 3, but I felt like triple Kuras was actually better than triple Thestalos, but since it's a go first deck, ripping a card of your opponent's hand actually is quite neat. 1 Kaios the Shadow Monarch, gladly you get this card actually for free in the structure deck that comes in the solo mode, so you don't have to craft this card at all. Keep this in mind. Problem with this card, especially in a go first deck, is if you read its effect, if this card is tribute summoned, target 1 card on the field, banish that target. It's not if this card is tribute summoned, you can banish 1 card on the field. So if this is the only card you control, you have to banish itself. Yeah, that's a bit shite. So you obviously have to play around this kind of thing. You can, since it's not a face-up card, you can set some of your cards that you definitely won't need. And if Kaios is the only Monarch in your starting hand and you need to play him, then yeah, you have to banish 1 of your own cards. So this card is a bit iffy, but it helps you get around cards that cannot be destroyed by card effects, which can happen quite a lot of the time. And this deck has another very big weakness besides the fact of Monarchs are extremely bricky, so you will have hands that are unplayable to the maximum. This deck doesn't have high attack point monsters. Without the field spell, you don't even have the whole thing of getting 800 attack points if you attack an opponent's monster. So the massive problem is, how do you get rid of annoying cards of your opponent? And a lot of the time the answer is, you don't really. Like, either you pop them with Kuras, or that is kind of it if you don't want to use Kaios in your deck. So I felt like 1 Kaios is actually quite neat. The good thing is you can search your Monarchs, which, yeah, you can at least get to Kaios quite quickly. Another good thing is if you play against opponents' monsters that cannot be targeted and whatnot, you can get around this by using the Monarch's Erupt. By negating its effects, obviously, you get around this kind of restriction. Problem is, rival cybers and stuff that are unaffected by card effects, you will not be able to get over it. Like, you will just lose the duel because you don't have enough attack point monsters, you don't have a way of getting rid of it, you don't play any kaijus. That's it. Like, doesn't work. So yeah, I felt like Kaios at 1 is fine, but you could just run another Thestalos if you want, or alter the Kuras ratios. But I felt like in a go first deck, Kuras in this specific one is actually quite nice because you get the extra 2 draws, because you want to make sure you get into your Monarch's Erupt, because this is your main playmaker of the deck. So you want to make sure you get this as quickly as possible, and with the double draw that Kuras can net you, this is quite achievable. Plus you will have cards to spare, like if you go into the Idia combo and you only tribute one of the 2, then you can destroy the other one. You can destroy stuff like your Prime Monarch. You can technically even destroy Return of the Monarchs after you've used the effect. You have to watch out with the chaining. You have to make Return of the Monarchs chainlink 2 and Kuras the Light Monarch chainlink 1, because otherwise the card gets destroyed first and then doesn't trigger anymore since it's a continuous spell card, so you have to watch out with this. Other than that, the extra draws are fine. 1 Majesty's Fiend. This is 1 super rare that I feel like you kind of need to craft, and it has Monarch stat lines, so you can search it with Return of the Monarchs. So I feel like this card is quite important, shuts down a lot of your opponent's plays, hand traps and whatnot. It cripples your deck to a certain point as well, sadly, but yeah, it's a necessary evil, but you don't have to play it. But I feel like at 1 shouldn't be too much of a problem. But if you want to cut 1 super rare, then this is definitely the one to cut, I assume. And last but not least, Mobius the Mega Monarch. That is your only Mega Monarch. That is for a simple reason. If you don't play the field spell, you will need 2 tributes for this card. And for 2 tributes, you need Idia to go off, which sometimes you will be stuck with the Pendulum monster in your hand and won't have Idia, or you will use the Prime Monarch, sending it to the graveyard before with Pantheism, for example. Then you only have 1 tribute as well, and you can't use your field spell as the main playmaker in the domain lock decks to actually reduce the level of your monster. So a lot of the time when I was testing it, I was stuck with the Mega Monarchs in my hand. And for the fact that they're the Mega Monarchs, at least the ones that aren't super rares or ultra rares, they are not as much better. Thestalos is quite nice, obviously, but in general, they are not that much better, especially the non-super rare ones, than the actual small ones, beside the fact they have 400 more tag. Only Mobius, I felt like, came up quite a few times that you can actually rip 3 spell trap cards on the field, plus your opponent cannot activate the targeted cards in response to the effect, which you have to tribute a water monster for, but hear me out, you actually can do this with the card of Strike of the Monarchs. I know not a lot of people play this card, but I'll get to it in a second. Reinforcement of the army, so just your Idia, also a nice ultra rare because you basically get it for free in the tutorial. Tenacity of the Monarchs, a super rare that you do want to play. I did test the deck without it at first, so I was like, oh, maybe just you get away with just playing 4 super rares, but you do not. This card is essential for the whole combo with getting your Pantheism into the graveyard, the Prime Monarch into the graveyard with Pantheism, then searching Tenacity and going on from there. So you have a spell trap in the graveyard to banish, so you don't have to use Pantheism because you kind of want to use this for something else. So this card is very essential, especially it adds 3 more copies of your main win condition to the deck, which is still the Monarch's Erupt. So I feel like triple Tenacity of the Monarchs is as necessary as triple Pantheism is. Pantheism is basically your card draw. It's not once per turn, at least the card draw effect, so you can actually cycle through your deck quite a lot if you happen to get your hands on this card. Also, it can search you basically any of your Monarch spell traps, so this card is just overall one of the big playmakers of the deck, so you definitely want to be running this at 3. One card that I don't see a lot of people run, which is for obvious reasons, it's just not the strongest card since it only destroys a set card on the field, not necessarily a set spell trap, so you can get around certain flip decks if that's any of your concern. Don't have to run this card, could swap it out for Escalation of the Monarchs if you prefer this. I tested it out and I felt like it didn't do it for me. A lot of people love this card and it's very like specific. I felt like it was, I had more of a success with Frost Blast, especially in the whole best of 1 kind of meta where a lot of people rely on spell trap heavy decks and destroying some back row with searchable Frost Blast and banishing some of your spells from the graveyard to recycle them with Idia can be actually quite nice. So I liked Frost Blast, but you don't have to run it in the deck. I ran double March of the Monarchs. First of all, it combos quite nice with Torrential Tribute. Second of all, it kind of ensures that you keep a monster and your opponent can't use certain cards against you, that basically everything that targets, Raigeki and these kind of things. Also to mention, it can be nice, but you could cut one of them and add a third one of Return of the Monarchs, because this card is somewhat crucial for your deck. But I haven't had the situation yet where I completely ran out of Monarchs and hadn't had lost the game anyway at this point. So I feel like Return of the Monarchs usually is fine because you will have loads of cards to help you search stuff, especially this card. But you could run it at 3, and most people would run it at 3 and then cut one March of the Monarchs. I actually felt like March came in more handy than it should have been. Clashes a tiny bit with the Pendulum card because you cannot summon special summon monsters from the extra deck. Also counts for Pendulum cards, but a lot of the time this is more of a setup. Your opponent actually wants to get rid of this quite quickly, so it can be somewhat nice. One card that I really like is Strike of the Monarchs. A lot of people don't play it in Monarchs, but that is for the simple fact in general that usually your main win condition is not Monarchs Erupt, but your win condition is actually Domain of the Monarchs. And for Domain, you actually have to control a Tribute Summon monster. So obviously you don't want to tribute your face-up Tribute Summon monster, because then you could not use the effect of Domain. The other thing is, though, that the Monarchs Erupt only you need a Tribute Summon monster on the field to activate this card, and at the end of your turn, so this card doesn't get destroyed. It's at the end of your turn, which is actually very important, because some opponents think if they just get rid of your Tribute Summon monster, they can actually get rid of this card at the end of their turn, but it's not. So I felt like Strike of the Monarch actually comes in handy if your opponent has a deck that relies very much on one power card. So if you negate this, get a draw, and replace your cards with it basically, and you have an engine going of having a Monarch for the next turn, you mainly will have Tribute for it as well if you had it once, then this card can actually shut down your opponent's plays quite a lot, since you can use this on activated cards like Raigeki and stuff as well, because it actually is negating the activation but the face-up card on the field. So it's neat. I like it. It's a bit niche, but in this specific deck it actually has its use, and every time I used it so far I didn't regret it afterwards, so I would say it does come in handy. Torrential Tribute, good card if you break, because you can still shut down your opponent's turn, hope that he doesn't OTK you. This card can make sure they don't, and yeah, that's why I basically run it, plus the synergy with March of the Monarchs can be quite neat from time to time as well. Solemn Judgment, just a all-around good go first card that can ensure your opponent doesn't kill you with one card. Monarchs Erupt is the playmaker of the deck. Whatever you want to say, is the playmaker of the deck. It works in conjunction with the Pendulum card quite well actually, because you can just Tribute Summon this card, have a Tribute Summon monster on the field, and then it doesn't really matter, because from that point onwards hopefully you can keep up a Tribute Summon monster every turn. If you can't, then you'll probably have lost the game anyway, because then you run out of monsters, and if you don't have any monsters you get OTK'd quicker than you like. Problem is, you couldn't activate this card if for some reason your opponent has an effect that stops your Pendulum card from being special summoned back out, because then you're kind of screwed. Then you can't even activate this card, but you should be smart enough to kind of play around this for sure. Prime Monarch, great cards to recycle your Monarch spell traps, nets you some draws. Also very good in the graveyard for getting Tribute Fodder, since you run so many low level Monarchs. That should be fine as well. Can be popped by Kuras to get another draw. In general, quite a good card. Could run it at 3, but don't really think it's necessary, especially not in this build. Cards that you could be playing instead of other cards, if you have them. You could run one Monarch Stormforth if you want to. Without Ether though, it's not as good going first, so it would be good going second. So if you want to have a card that's maybe searchable, help you go second against certain decks, that would be the case. You could run at least one Domain if you have it. If you happen to have one Domain, put it in for one of the cards, put it in for Frost Blast for example, and just run it, search it out. The card helps you against extra deck decks. The card helps you run over monsters that have more than like 2,400 attack. Yeah, it's a great card for a Tribute Summon deck like the Monarchs, and if you have it at 1, play it. Ether over Erebus, but both of the effects are actually fine, because you can send your spell traps to the graveyard, which is an effect that is quite handy for getting things like Prime Monarch or Pantheism of the Monarchs into the graveyard, which can be very, very helpful. And other cards that you can play is Max C is a good stuff card. You could play Cult by the Grave, you can play because Ash Blossom hits you quite hard from time to time. Same for Crossout Designator if you want to. Ice Dragon's Prison is a card that's very playable. Twin Twisters can be helpful, but I don't think it's necessary. 1-for-1 is another play starter, excuse me, because it gets you Edia out of the deck. In total, this build is fine. This build can work in gold, gets you some wins, gets you some losses. Most of the time if you lose though, you know it quite quickly, so either you can't play any cards or your opponent will already get around your main win condition turn 1 or turn 2. So if you lose quickly. If you win, it takes a while. Monarch games mainly take a lot if your opponent doesn't surrender, and more often than not your opponent actually surrenders the game rather than you actually having to finish them. But yeah, that's how Monarchs are. Hope you enjoy the deck profile, hope you enjoy the deck, have fun. You don't need any special ultra rares for this deck, and enjoy the ranked grind.